So today we're going to cover social learning theories and humanistic theories. We'll start with the two social learning theories. First, leading off with Rotter. Rotter criticized Hull's drive theory and behaviorism, which largely integrated drive theory as a foundation. In general, social learning theories criticize drive and behaviorist theories for failing to consider social environments of the learner, for failing to consider cognitive factors, even though that was intentionally omitted, and they criticize these theories for being too deterministic. Alright, so on to Julian Rotter, the person. And so early in the semester, we saw psychoanalysts that were inspired by traumatic experiences facing their generation or themselves personally, and then exploring personality from a clinical perspective. Rotter is more of an example of a traditional academic who's just deeply influenced by the instructors and mentors that he engaged with. So he had Solomon Asch as an undergraduate professor. Solomon Asch famous for his line experiments demonstrating the social pressures to conformity. He attends lectures by Alfred Adler. Rotter also took classes under Kurt Lewin in graduate school. Kurt Lewin, seen as the father of social psychology. So Rotter moves away from theories based on psychoanalysis and behaviorism and developed a social learning theory. Recall Freud's psychoanalysis focused on people's deep-seated instinctual motives as determining one's behavior. Individuals were seen as being naive to their unconscious impulses, and treatment required long-term analysis of childhood experience. Even learning approaches at the time were dominated by drive theory, which held that people are motivated by physiologically based impulses that press the individual to satisfy them. Conversely, the main idea in Julian Rotter's social learning theory is that personality represents an interaction of the individual with his or her environment. To Rotter, one cannot speak of a personality as only internal to the individual and independent of the environment. Neither can one focus on behavior as being a set of automatic responses to an objective set of environmental stimuli. Rather, to understand behavior, one must take both the individual, i.e. his or her life history of learning and experiences, and the environment, i.e. those stimuli that the person is aware of and responding to. Right? You need to take both of those into account. And so he saw himself as a social interactionist, right? One who's concerned with the interplay between one's internal entities or personality factors and social situations. Right? You need to emphasize both to understand a person. Rotter endorsed a pre-existing theory, the empirical law of effect, as his motivating factor for humans. The law of effect states that people are motivated to seek out positive stimulation or reinforcement and to avoid unpleasant stimulation. Rotter suggested that the expected effect of one's behavior influenced the motivation of people to engage in that behavior. If one expects a positive outcome from behavior, or thinks there's a high probability of a positive outcome, then they'll be more likely to engage in the behavior. The behavior is reinforced with positive outcomes, leading a person to repeat the behavior. So he gives us this equation that indicates that our predictions for a person's behavior is a function of the expectancy. How likely do you think you are to get a reward? And how valuable you would find that reward if you received it. And this is the framework for his paradigm learning theory. Now, the book, somewhat cruelly, uses the example of a woman named Martha who sometimes dates a man named Fred. And it says that dating Fred has a low reinforcement value because he is among the last that she would pick among possible dating options. But she has high expectancy around Fred, meaning she knows that he has a huge crush on her. And so there's a high likelihood that if she performs the behavior of inviting him over for dinner, then it will likely be reinforced by him showing up before she can even hang up the phone. Right, so our behavior is thus informed both by what we expect we can obtain in terms of reinforcement and how valuable that reinforcement will be if we receive it. So herein lies the key difference between Rotter's theory and classic behaviorism. So the classic view focuses on actual rewards and punishments, while Rotter's social learning variant focuses on beliefs about reward and punishment. Right? These beliefs shape behavior, Rotter claimed, even when they're inaccurate, right? Even when they're not reflected with actual rewards or punishments. Now, Rodder claimed that people actually have two kinds of expectancies, specific and general. So a specific expectancy is just the belief that a certain behavior at a certain time and place will lead to a specific outcome. At the other extreme, people have generalized expectancies. These are beliefs about whether anything you do is likely to make a difference. So Rodder referred to generalized expectancies as your perceived locus of control. If you have an internal locus of control, you believe that there's a causal relationship between your own efforts and environmental consequences. If you have an external locus of control, you believe that what you do will not make much difference. Right? So specifically, locus of control is the degree to which people expect that reinforcement is dependent on their own characteristics, behaviors, and efforts, versus the degree to which they expect it to be due to luck, fate, chance, or powerful other people. More contemporary research has shown that one's locus of control can be applied to specific situations and not others. So, for example, some people have an internal academic locus of control, so they believe that they have control over their academic outcomes, but they have an external locus of control about other types of outcomes. Similarly, there are generalized values referred to as need values. Right? So needs are the type of reinforcement that are going to motivate you across situations. And then needs values are how you prioritize your different needs and how important they are. Right? So we have a specific sense of how much we value a specific outcome at a specific place and time. That's our reinforcement value. Right? And then we have our needs values, which are hierarchies around the types of reinforcement that might motivate us more than others. So specifically in terms of personality, Rodder thought of personality as a relatively stable set of potentials for responding to situations in a particular way. Rodder showed that if you put people in different situations, that they would respond differently. So a person might be outgoing in classrooms, but shy in a dating situation. But people behave similarly within the same types of situations. Right? So that person is outgoing across all classroom situations and shy across all dating situations. And the extent to which he thought of personality types, right, he just referred to individual differences in the types of values that people held are their locus of control. In terms of Rodder's impact, he inspired the widespread belief in social interactionism. It really gets popularized by one of his students, Walter Mischel, but Rodder serves as an inspiration for those who will come after him and spread this belief in social interactionism. So importantly, as a function of social interactionism, Rodder sees personality and therefore behavior as always changeable. According to him, changing the environment the individual is in and changing the way that that person's thinking would lead to a change in their behavior. And therefore, a person's personality traits also change according to those new situations. Now, in addition, he's introducing a quantitative study of mental states. Right? So as opposed to the behaviorists who came before him, recommended against trying to look into the black box of the mind. Right? Instead, Rodder's bringing empiricism, quantitative analysis, objective scientific research methods into the study of mental states. In addition, he introduces a focus on beliefs about rewards and punishment, in addition to actual rewards and punishments. Now, while Rodder was definitely influential, the second learning theory is by far the most influential. This is Albert Bandura, and he's building directly from Rodder. And so he's another academic. Learning theories are all the rage when he is in school getting his training, and he follows in that tradition. And so similarly, he criticized drive and behaviorist theories, just like Rodder did, but he also disliked the use of animal subjects. He thought that humans have more complex thought. And so he builds on existing learning theories, introducing his social cognitive theory. Now, the similarities to behaviorism are that he's also emphasizing reinforcement and punishment. Yet there are important differences from behaviorism. Specifically, social cognitive refers to how we interpret social situations. Right? So the interpretation, that's the cognition. Right? Social situations, that's the social part. And so He focuses on internal cognitions. Right? This is an advancement similar to Rotter, and yet he goes beyond Rotter in his development of theory around those internal cognitions. And second, completely unique from what Rotter contributes, he introduces this concept of observational learning, right, in which direct reinforcement is unnecessary and we can learn from watching role models. Right? We watch what happens to others and we can gain wisdom from their experiences. So not just our own history of reinforcement is what matters, but we can project into the future what might happen for us for new things based on watching other people's behavior that we haven't ever engaged in. Right, so here's how observational learning plays out. First, all the time we're surrounded by people talking and acting in different ways. Then we notice and remember these observed actions. Not only the actions, but whether or not a person is reinforced or punished for their actions. Then we mentally rehearse. Rehearsal is when we not just replay in our mind what somebody else did and whether or not they were rewarded for it, but we rehearse, okay, what would happen if I did this? And then if we think a good outcome would follow and we're motivated, then we will ourselves physically reproduce those behaviors. Right? So you have to pay attention to other people, and then you're imagining yourself in the situation. For behaviors I think I too would be rewarded for, I'll add that to my repertoire of behaviors. However, just because it works for some people doesn't mean it's going to work for me, right? So you can imagine going to the office and I see my colleague Sarah get complimented on the dress she's wearing in the faculty meeting. I think to myself, maybe I should wear that same exact dress. But then I remember in high school, other guys are mistreated when they wear clothes stereotypically associated with women. Maybe I shouldn't do that. In this way, Bandura argues that most human behavior is learned through modeling. And in this way, we can learn from the wisdom of other people's experiences and not only have to rely on our own histories of reinforcement and or punishment in determining our personalities. Now, the most famous example of this comes from Bandura's Bobo doll study. A Bobo doll is an inflatable toy that has the face of a clown on it. It has a heavy rubber bottom so that when you punch it, it pops right back up vertically again, allowing you to keep punching it. And so we invited boys and girls from a set of schools to come in and to test the effect of viewing adult models. Right? So adult models either displayed passive behavior or aggressive behavior. And the third condition, they had the children come in without having the adults present, that as a control versus two different types of adult behavior, passive or aggressive behavior. Importantly, not only did the adults model this aggressive behavior, but then they had the experimenter either reward or punish with positive or negative feedback for that aggression. Then the adults leave, they allow the children to stay in the room with the Bobo doll, and when left alone, those children who watched aggressive models get rewarded, later imitated and even expanded upon the aggressive behavior. Right? They came up with new creative ways to beat up the Bobo doll. Interestingly, those who saw the adults get negative feedback in regards to their own aggressive behavior, they still reported having a higher affinity for aggressive behavior relative to other conditions. Right? They said it would be more fun to punch the Bobo doll as opposed to those who never saw an adult being aggressive towards the doll. So they had a higher affinity for this aggressive behavior. They thought it would be fun to be aggressive, but they didn't act on it when given the opportunity, right? Because of the punishment given the model. So the kids acquired the behavioral pattern but didn't perform it, right? Because of the social learning that took place. So this expands on Skinner's theory by showing it doesn't have to be our own experiences with rewards or punishments that influence our behavior. As opposed to Skinner, Bandura also lays out rules for when we learn from reinforcement or don't. We are more influenced by models who are similar to us, especially those who have the same gender. We are more influenced by models who are attractive or powerful and those who have control over reinforcement in our lives. And we are more influenced by the models who we pay attention to for any other reason, right? So those who are around us when we are less fatigued, less distracted. And when we don't, we pay attention to those people less, even if they have significant reinforcement lessons to be learned from them. A key contribution of social cognitive learning theory of personality is the introduction of the concept of self-efficacy to the study of how our personalities develop. So Rotner introduced a notion of expectancy, which is the perceived conditional probability that when you do something, you will attain your goal. Bandura considered the probability of whether or not you can do something in the first place. So to extend our example from the text before, according to Rotter, Martha is more likely to ask Fred out if she believes that he's likely to reinforce the behavior, and if he's a fun person, making the date a valuable experience. Those are all expectations around Fred. Bandura instead says Martha's expectations about herself also play an important role. So Bandura would argue that Martha would also ask anybody out, regardless of their own disposition, if she believes that she's an attractive dating partner, has high self-efficacy around romantic interactions. Conversely, if Martha's self-concept included low perceived self-efficacy, she won't even ask out the most desperate person she knows. So it's not only about our expectations for others and whether or not they're going to reinforce us, but our own expectations about ourselves that are critically important. Another key contribution was observational learning. So researchers argue that humans uniquely learn most of our behavior through observational learning. Now, Bandura focused on aggressive behavior, but like aggression, cooperative or helpful behavior can also be stimulated by modeling and imitation. So there are broad applications to this observational learning paradigm. So, for example, classic research was done by Bryan and Test. In the 60s, they arranged to have a female confederate of the experimenter stand next to a Ford Mustang with a flat left rear tire on a busy LA freeway. Now, in the no modeling condition, the woman simply stood by the car and looked at the flat tire. In the modeling condition, there was an Oldsmobile that was planted a quarter mile before the Mustang. Similar situation, but here a man pretended to change the tire on the Oldsmobile while the second woman watched him. The point of the research was to see if the sight of the man helping the woman with the Oldsmobile would influence people to stop and help the woman driving the Mustang. So this is exactly what happened. With the model car absent, there were 35 vehicles who stopped. And in the same time frame, when the model was present, 58 individuals stopped to help. Observational learning applies to a broad set of applications. Now, a third innovation of Bandura's is this concept of reciprocal determinism, right, which is just an analysis of how individuals shape the environments around them. So until Bandura, classical behaviorism and even Rotter treated environmental input such as reinforcement as something that's inflicted upon you. Right? People were passive in these older formulations. So Bandura argued that you aren't just put into environments like rats put into a Skinner box. Right? You often get to choose your environments. You choose which classes to take, you choose which friends to spend time with. You could choose a spin class with an encouraging instructor, or one with a militaristic instructor who embarrasses those who aren't giving maximum effort. Right? You choose your environment oftentimes. But in addition, you can also change your environment. So if when you go out to parties, right, the party turns up as soon as you get there, there's a different reinforcement than if you tend to make the party more of a drag. Right? If you ask a question in class and get an interesting answer, the reinforcement you receive for going to class in the first place is amplified. Now, this isn't always the case. A child can't choose their parents, right? But you could choose whether or not to marry a person who gets excited about your accomplishments, as opposed to someone who constantly diminishes them out of jealousy. Right? So Bandura introduces this concept of reciprocal determinism into this broader set of learning theories. So overall, social learning theories contributed the understanding that situations matter to understanding how we can predict the variations in people's behavior. And by considering both the person and the environment, we get a much better picture of why people do the things that they do. In addition, they add that behavioral decisions are interactive, right? It's not just a result of internal mental processes. Overall, when we look at the legacy of learning theories, one of the biggest contributions is that it's establishing psychology as an objective science of modern methodologies through the shift towards experimental methods. In terms of personality specifically, learning theory gives lots of concrete guidelines for how to change behavior. Right? And it moves beyond how do we understand mental illness, as psychoanalysts look to do, and move towards understanding broad behavioral change, right? Particularly that which causes social benefit and provides instructions on how to do it. Right? So, for example, we want to change behavior, we can positively reinforce other people's good behaviors. In addition, we can model good behavior ourselves so that others that we aren't in relationship with to reinforce directly still learn through observation of our good behavior. Right? And not just can we change others, we can change ourselves, right? We can change ourselves by changing the environments within which we place ourselves. We can choose more positive environments to maximize positive outcomes for ourselves. We choose to be around positive people. You essentially set your own schedule of reinforcement.